Great Royal Rivalries in History. King Harold Godwinson versus William the Conqueror. 1066, a date which lives in infamy in many a schoolchild's history test. For in that year, England saw 4 kings and 2 bitter enemies battle for the throne. The ultimate victor would change the course of history. The new series, King and Conqueror, dramatizes this pivotal rivalry, with all the guts and glory of Game of Thrones, sans dragons and ice zombies, and with surprisingly little incest. But what really went down in 1066? Who were the questionable King Harold Godwinson and the hellbent invader William the Conqueror? Let's find out. First, let's meet the king. Harold Godwinson was the son of Godwin, the powerful Earl of Wessex. Godwin began his career supporting King Edmund Ironsides, a member of the Wessex royal family and 3 times great-grandson of Alfred the Great. But when King Edmund faced an invasion from Canute, King of Denmark and Norway, Godwin switched sides. He'd bet on the right horse. Edmund was deposed and then shot with an arrow while on the toilet. Canute was crowned King of England in 1016. Now well placed at court, Godwin married Canute's sister-in-law, Geitha Thorkilsdottir. They acquired Bosham Manor on the south coast from the Archbishop of Canterbury, moved in and welcomed 9 children, including Harold, who was born around 1020. When King Canute died, there was a succession dispute between the sons of his first Danish wife and his second wife, Emma of Normandy. Godwin backed Harold Harfoot, and on his orders he was involved in the murder of his half-brother, Alfred. Harfoot died suddenly of a mysterious illness at 24, and when Alfred's whole brother, Harthacnut, came to claim the throne, Godwin was on the shit list. He avoided execution with a generous bribe, but he still got the royal cold shoulder. So he was probably involved in the plot to assassinate Harthacnut. While the 24-year-old king was attending a wedding, he stood up to offer a toast to the bride and groom. He suddenly fell on the ground with convulsions and died. Godwin stepped in to play kingmaker to yet another royal half-brother, Edward the Confessor. He was the son of Emma of Normandy by her first husband, King Ethelred the Unready. So with Edward's ascent, the throne returned to the royal house of Wessex and was back in Anglo-Saxon rather than Scandinavian hands. Now Godwin was in the best position possible. He became Edward's dominant advisor and the power behind the throne. To ensure he remained there, he pressured the king to marry his daughter, Edith of Wessex, and make her queen. As a wedding present, her brothers were granted earldoms. Eldest brother, Sweyn, abducted the abbess of Leominster. As punishment, he was sent into exile and his lands were given to second brother, Harold. He was the Earl of East Anglia. He met the nobles of his new domain and was especially keen to get to know the area's wealthiest heiress, Edith the Fair, also called Edith Swanneck. As her nickname suggests, she was a renowned beauty. She and Harold were handfasted in the Danish fashion, a tradition which formalized their relationship but was not recognized by the church. Thus, Harold remained strategically open to future matrimonial opportunities. The relationship seems to have been happy and devoted. The couple had at least 5 children and lived together for 20 years. Harold's sister, Queen Edith, was an educated woman and spoke several languages. It has long been believed that Edward's incredible piety compelled him to take a vow of chastity, and that this is why he and his queen didn't have any children. But more recent scholars have re-examined this idea. It is now thought more likely that the couple did consummate their marriage, but some combination of fertility problems and Edward's grudge against a wife thrust upon him led to their childlessness. He came to resent his overbearing father-in-law, too. At one point, the king acted against his keepers. He forced the Godwins out of the country, sent Edith to a convent and contemplated taking a new bride. But Godwin and his sons returned with an army and forced their way back into the king's good graces. Edith was reinstated as queen, despite not fulfilling a medieval consort's paramount duty. Edith was a valuable helpmate to her husband. She was popular with the people and promoted his public image through jewelry. She hired goldsmiths to create crowns and jewels to adorn herself and her husband as befit their royal status. Though she always placed herself modestly behind Edward over the 20 years of their marriage, she became one of his closest advisors. And her many brothers reaped wealth and benefits from their close connection to the queen. In 1053, Godwin died suddenly while banqueting with Edward. His eldest surviving son, Harold, stepped into his role as chief royal advisor. A chronicler wrote that Harold was distinguished by his great size and strength of body, his polished manners, his firmness of mind, and command of words, by a ready wit and a variety of excellent qualities. As Earl of Wessex, he was the overlord of the southern third of England. He and Dowager Queen Edith helped their brother Tostig to claim the earldom of Northumbria, the northern third of England. The brothers then turned their sights on the central third and attacked the Earl of Mercia. His ally, King Griffith of Wales, was betrayed by his own men, and his head was presented to Harold. The Earl then took advantage of the fact that he was technically single by marrying Griffith's widow, Ealdgyth, who also happened to be the daughter of the Earl of Mercia and the granddaughter of Lady Godiva. But this marriage alliance drove a wedge between Harold and his brother Tostig, who was driven out and replaced by Morcar. Now Harold had influence over all of England, and he was a top contender to get the throne after the death of childless King Edward. In 1064, the Earl was shipwrecked on the coast of France. Why he was there and what happened next is a great mystery. According to highly biased Norman sources, Harold was captured and presented to William, Duke of Normandy. He then accompanied the Duke to a battle against Brittany and saved 2 Norman knights from quicksand. During his French sojourn, the Normans claim that Harold swore fealty to William and pledged an oath on holy relics that he would support William's claim to the English throne. It is not clear if this actually happened, or if perhaps it did, but Harold was crossing his fingers behind his back, as playing along with his captors was his best path to freedom. Either way, Harold was allowed to return to England, just in time to attend the deathbed of King Edward. The 62-year-old sovereign had suffered several strokes. He was too weak to attend the consecration of his new church at Westminster. Queen Edith sat by his deathbed. According to her and other courtiers' rather biased accounts, Edward awoke from a coma just long enough to point to her brother Harold as his successor. Edward the Confessor died on January 5, 1066. He was the first king to be buried in Westminster Abbey. A century later, Edward was canonized as a saint. His burial crown, now a holy relic, was removed from his skeletal head and used as the coronation crown for King Henry III and dozens of English monarchs after. It was destroyed in the 1650s during the Civil War. The crown placed on King Charles III's head is a replica. Harold was in a big rush to get his own coronation and secure his place as king, so he was crowned in Westminster Abbey immediately following Edward's funeral. Even back then, it was seen as unseemly to celebrate a new reign when the previous king's body was right there and not even cold. But the nobility were all in town for the funeral anyway, and Harold didn't want to take any chances. While he was the most powerful noble in England, he wasn't actually royal at all. Some genealogists have suggested that the Godwins may have descended from Alfred the Great's elder brother, King Ethelred I of Wessex, who died in 871. But the family were just as likely upstart farmers. Thus, Harold's claim to kingship was based on political power alone, not divine provenance. When William of Normandy learned of Harold's gunshot coronation, he was pissed. Now let's meet the Conqueror. William of Normandy was born in 1028. Despite casting choices, he was actually 8 years younger than Harold. He was the son of Duke Robert I and a 3 times great-grandson of Rollo, a Viking warrior who besieged Paris in 885 and demanded northern France as ransom. The area became known as Normandy because it was ruled by Northmen. William's mother, Hervela, was the daughter of a tanner or embalmer. She was not married to the Duke, so baby William was saddled with the nickname the Bastard. But that wasn't a big deal to the Normans, and as he had no legitimate brothers, William was his father's heir. In 1034, Duke Robert went on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He died on his way back, and his 7-year-old son became Duke of Normandy. William spent his youth surrounded by schemes to usurp his throne, and a revolving door of guardians, one of whom was murdered in the boy's bedroom while he was asleep. The young duke was often hidden in the homes of peasants to keep him safe. Somehow he survived, but the bloody struggle for his throne left an indelible imprint on his psyche. At 19, William faced yet another rebellion, but the teenage duke boldly led his army to victory at the Battle of Hastings. From then on, he was taken seriously as a leader, and the plots simmered down. William was described by contemporaries as a burly and robust man with a guttural voice. He had the strength to draw bows that others could not, and was unequal as a fighter and horseman. Recent examination of his femur bone indicate that he was unusually tall for the time at 5'10". However, William was never a scholar. He struggled to find time to read, and preferred to spend his days off the battlefield hunting. William continued to sharpen his sword against the Dukes of Brittany and Burgundy, the Counts of Maine and Anjou, and even King Henri I of France. His strategy and chutzpah made him a successful military commander, and his power grew. When it came to governing his own people, his primary objective was maintaining authority. He greatly expanded the power of the church and built 22 new monasteries, not because he was concerned for the souls of his subjects, but because religion was a highly effective tool to control them. He appointed his cronies as bishops, including naming his half-brother Odo Bishop of Bayeux. William passed laws increasing the number of holy days, during which violence was not allowed, expressly so he could prevent dissenters from rising up against him. Now firmly in command, William needed an impressive duchess by his side. He set his sights on Matilda, daughter of the Count of Flanders in the modern-day Netherlands. When the Duke wrote to ask for her hand, Matilda refused, replying that she was too high-born for him. William did not take this rejection well. He rode to Flanders and confronted her while she was on her way to church. He is said to have pulled her off her high horse by her braids and thrown her onto the ground. After this violent courtship, Matilda did indeed marry him. They had 10 children together, and William is believed to have been affectionate and faithful to her. Unusually for the time, he fathered no illegitimate offspring. Matilda took a great interest in her children's well-being, and both her sons and daughters received impressive educations. In 1052, when the Godwins were on the outs, King Edward of England was on the lookout for a new successor. Norman sources claim that he settled on William and named him heir. The Duke had some blood ties to the English royal family. Edward's mother, Emma of Normandy, was the daughter of Duke Richard I, William's great-grandfather. So the English king and the Norman duke were first cousins once removed. But William was not himself a descendant of an English king. Nevertheless, when Edward died in 1066, and William received word that Harold had placed the crown on his own head, rather than overnighting it straight to Normandy, he was incensed. He ordered the construction of 700 warships for his invasion of England. He had been on that grind mindset since childhood, and he wasn't about to back down now. Other nobles questioned what William was doing and why he thought he was any more entitled to the English throne than Harold. But when William spread the possible fib about Harold making an oath to support William's claim, they were outraged. Vowing on holy relics was a serious matter in the Middle Ages. By labeling Harold an oathbreaker and himself the wronged party, William got all of Christendom on his side. Even Pope Alexander II gave his approval for the invasion. William's wife, Matilda, proved to be his ride or die. She gifted him a warship, the Mora, on which the Duke personally sailed. The Duchess stayed behind to rule Normandy as regent while he was gone. Harold, who hadn't had much time to do any actual ruling, was alarmed. He assembled troops in the Isle of Wight, ready to defend England. But unfavorable winds prevented William from setting sail for 7 months. By September, the English army was listless, and provisions were running low. Just then, a third contender threw his hat in the ring. Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, was the heir of King Magnus I. He supposedly had made a pact with King Harthacnut that if either of them died without an heir, the other would succeed. His equally dubious claim was supported by Harold's brother, Tostig, who was furious about having been thrown out. Together, they invaded near York, and Harold marched his tired army north in just 4 days. He caught Hardrada and Tostig by surprise. According to one account, before the battle, a single messenger rode up alone to the disgruntled duo. He offered Tostig the return of his earldom if he would turn against Hardrada. Tostig asked what King Harold was willing to give Hardrada for his trouble. The rider replied, 7 feet of English ground, as he is taller than other men. With this verbal slap, he rode back to the English army and prepared to attack. Hardrada was impressed by the rider's brashness and asked Tostig who it was. He replied that the man was his own brother, Harold Godwinson. The brazen king won the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and Hardrada and Tostig were both slain on the field. Meanwhile, William finally got tired of waiting for fair weather and ordered his ships to set sail across the channel. They were caught in a storm and several vessels sank, but most made it to England on September 28th. Harold had to march his now exhausted army back south to face William's 7,000 fresh soldiers. The rivals finally met near Hastings. On October 14th, the English and Norman armies finally clashed. The fighting went on for 9 muddy, bloody hours. In the heat of battle, King Harold was killed. His 2 remaining brothers, Gareth and Leithwine, were also slain. Exactly how King Harold died has long been debated. The most popular story is that he was hit in the eye with an arrow. The Bayeux Tapestry shows a knight with an arrow in his eye, surrounded by the inscription, Hic Harold Rex interfectus est. Here King Harold is killed. But it is not entirely clear that Harold is supposed to be that soldier or one of the others in the bloodbath around him. Another contemporary account claims that the king fell by a lance and was dismembered. Some or all of this might have been Harold's gruesome fate. What we know for sure is that he did not leave Hastings alive, and with the king dead, his army was defeated. Harold's mangled corpse is said to have been identified by his first common-law wife, Edith the Fair. She recognized him by private marks on his chest only she had seen. These may have been birthmarks, scars, or love bites, though some have suggested that they were tattoos. Legend has it that he was inked with the words Edith and England. Harold's bereaved mother offered William her son's weight in gold for the return of his corpse. But the victor felt it unseemly that Harold should be buried as a king, when so many men laid unburied on the battlefield. William suggested his rival be thrown in the sea. Harold's final resting place remains unknown, but legend says that Edith took his corpse to Wiltham Abbey in Essex. What became of Edith and her children after that is unknown. Some sources claim they sought refuge in Denmark. Harold's legal wife, Ealdgyth, was pregnant when she was widowed. She gave birth to twins, Harold and Wulf. They took refuge in her ancestral lands of Chester and were protected by her brothers. Dowager Queen Edith of Wessex lost all 3 of her brothers in the Battle of Hastings and was the last member of the Godwinson family left alive in England. She survived another 9 years. William had won the battle, but he did not yet have the crown. While he marched to London, panicked barons named the last male member of the Wessex royal family, 13-year-old Edgar Atheling, as king. He was the grandson of King Edmund Ironsides, and of the 1066 contenders, he had the best hereditary claim to the throne. Had Edward the Confessor lived another 5 years, until Edgar was 18, the prince might have been in the position to claim the throne from the off and defend it. And all of English history after would have been different. But as a child unable to lead an army, Edgar didn't stand a chance. He was never crowned, and his reign lasted just 2 months. One by one, nobles abandoned him and pledged loyalty to William. By December, the conquest was inevitable. Edgar had no choice but to hand over the crown. The young deposed king was held as the conqueror's prisoner for some time, but eventually he escaped and took a ship north. He married his sister, Margaret, to King Malcolm III of Scotland, who supported his bid to retake the English throne. But the scheme failed. Edgar the Exile attained the great age of 73, fueled by his lust for revenge. He spent the rest of his life in futile attempts to regain his lost throne. William of Normandy was crowned king on Christmas Day, 1066. He was England's 4th monarch that year, but the succession escalator came to a stop with him. In 1068, his wife, Matilda, journeyed to England to take her place by his side. She was crowned queen in Westminster Abbey by the Archbishop of York during the Feast of Pentecost. New language was added to the ceremony, asserting that the queen was divinely placed by God. This was all part of the PR campaign to reframe William's conquest, not as a matter of bigger army takes it all, but as God's divine will. Another piece of propaganda was the Bayeux Tapestry, which was commissioned by William's brother, Odo, Bishop of Bayeux, and made by English artists in Kent. The iconic piece of history measures 1 foot 8 inches high by 224 feet long. It depicts 58 scenes of William's conquest from a decidedly Norman point of view. The well-preserved piece, which is technically an embroidery, not a tapestry, can be seen today in its own museum in Bayeux, France. William remained on the throne for 21 years. His strong leadership did create some stability. He built castles along the often lawless Welsh border and made a truce with King Malcolm III of Scotland. But the turmoil was far from over. While Harold had had some concern for the welfare of his people, William's only care was his own power. He and his Norman knights overhauled England's political structure, legal system, and defenses. He fully implemented the feudal system. That meant all the land in the country now belonged to the king, and all the people on it were his tenants. William ordered the creation of the Domesday Book, which inventoried all the land and property in his kingdom, a massive achievement for the time, which made tax collection much easier and enriched the crown. Naturally, once taxes were involved, there was a great deal of resistance from English nobles and commoners. But the Normans imposed their might with a revolutionary piece of technology, the castle. They built the first motte and bailey castles in England. The most famous, the Tower of London, dominated the skyline of the capital and reminded the English that they had little hope of standing against their new Norman overlords. William also built a ring of castles around London. Each was 1 day's march from the capital and 1 day's march from the next. The most famous of these is Windsor Castle. The north of England was still upset, so they rose up against Norman rule. William marched his army north and staged a campaign of terror and brutality. They destroyed villages, burned farmland, and killed every person and animal they came across. Famine ensued, forcing many to resort to cannibalism. It would take decades for the area to recover. The harrying of the north was a strong warning to others. Matilda joined William on this brutal campaign. She gave birth to the 9th of their 10 children, Henry, while they were on the march. She had become as ruthless as her husband. She sought revenge on an old flame, a former English ambassador to Flanders who had rejected her teenage infatuation years earlier. Now, as his sovereign queen, Matilda used her power to confiscate the man's lands and throw him in prison where he died. It seemed neither William nor Matilda could handle rejection. William had learned in Normandy that religion was a great tool to suppressing his uneducated and superstitious subjects. He had impressive cathedrals built around England. In them, Norman nobles married many Anglo-Saxon ladies, often by arrangement, sometimes by force. This allowed the invaders to integrate into their new country and claim their wives' English land. This mandatory melding of societies reshaped the culture of England, from Anglo-Saxon with a view to Scandinavian alliance, to a decidedly French ruling class. French was the language of the court for the next 300 years. This is why English words for food have an Anglo-Saxon name when they're in the field, and a French name when they're on the table, such as cow and beef, pig and pork, and sheep and mutton. King William spent the rest of his reign indulging in all three. The once fit and powerful warrior grew obese. In 1083, Queen Matilda died at the age of 51. William was heartbroken and swore to her on her deathbed that he would give up hunting, his favorite hobby, in a display of his grief. 4 years later, King William was visiting France. While riding his horse, his protruding belly hit the hard wooden pommel of his saddle, and his internal organs were ruptured. He died in agony a few days later, at the age of 59. Though the conqueror had commanded legions, he had never been loved. After he took his final breath, those attending his deathbed looted everything in the room. The royal corpse was left naked on the floor. Eventually, a loyal knight had the king's remains washed and transported to the Abbey of Saint-Étienne-de-Caen, where Matilda rested. William's corpse, now bloated, would not fit into his small stone sarcophagus. As he was wedged in, the swollen bowels burst, and an intolerable stench assailed the nostrils of the crowd. The priest rushed through the rites so everyone could escape the royal stench. William I's undignified end was seen as divine justice by the English people he had conquered. Immediately after William's death, war broke out between his 3 surviving sons over the thrones he had left behind. First son, Robert, ended up with Normandy, while second son, William, got England. His reign lasted 13 years, but was cut short when he mysteriously found an arrow in his chest while out hunting. Third son, Henry, who was with him at the time, professed his innocence, but he promptly had himself crowned king. The Norman dynasty would remain on the English throne for 88 years. All English monarchs since have claimed descent from the ultimate victor of 1066, William the Conqueror. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also join my Patreon to support my work and get early access to all of my multi-part series. Thank you for watching.